Welcome to Gold Star Medical's CPT Coding and Principles of ICD Coding workshop. This class is part of the introduction for the Coding Certificate Proficiency Program. This is the second part of the Principles of Coding portion of the workshop. We had our first webinar last week and we covered basic coding rules for ICD-10. We also covered some basic medical terminology, and we discussed the importance of learning how to read an op note or a SOAP note. If you need a copy, a webinar copy or recording of last week's session, please let me know. You can email me at goldstarmedical@msn.com and I'll be happy to provide that for you. And so what we're doing now is we're halfway through our manual. The manual that we are using, if you have webcam up, is the PMI Basics Principles of Coding. These 18 hours of coding education is provided by PMI, Practice Management Institute, and we're using their materials. I'm an instructor with Practice Management Institute, so I'm out teaching this material all over the country throughout the year, and this is material that I also use to help train billers who are coming in to work for me at Gold Star Medical Business Services, and we are a full-service medical billing company and practice staff education company as well. So what we're doing is we're working in this manual. Right now we're going to start, because this is the second half of the class, we're going to start on page, I believe it is page 34 of your manual. So let's go ahead and turn there. This is a little bit of a review. We started getting into this last week at the first half of this session, and so I just want to kind of run through this to go over the structure of the coding and the structure of the code book. So first of all, CPT stands for Current Procedural Terminology. This is the code that is used on insurance claims to describe services that are performed by a physician or a healthcare practitioner. It is a systematic listing of procedures and services, and the use of the code would assume that the performance of the service was either done directly or supervised by a physician. So what I mean by that is, there's a service, for example, of a blood draw, okay, to draw blood for labs, and there's a code for that. But a physician doesn't always perform that service. That's usually performed by a nurse. However, the physician would need to be supervising that. In other words, the physician needs to be in the building in order for those blood draws to be done and billed under that physician's license, or their NPI, which stands for National Provider Identifier. Every physician has one, and when claims are billed out, as you'll learn in the billing part of the boot camp, it is billed out under the NPI of the supervising or rendering physician. So with that said, we have to make sure that any time a service is provided, it is being provided either by or under the direct supervision of a physician or eligible healthcare practitioner. Codes can be used by other healthcare providers, but reimbursement can be affected. And last week I used the example of if a neurosurgeon has a patient into their office and they do a neurological exam on that patient, that is a very high level of exam. A family practice doctor can also do an exam, and it's the same code. It would be the same exam code, but because the neurologist is performing that exam, they're going to get reimbursed at a higher level, and that has to do with a concept called taxonomy. The taxonomy code of that physician is different than that of a family practice doctor, and so the same code may elicit a different reimbursement depending on the type of healthcare practitioner that's rendering the service. All right, so there are basically 6 major sections of the Category 1 CPT codes. And Category 1 CPT codes are the CPT codes that represent the services. Now, you'll notice on your slide here that there are also listed Category 2 and Category 3 codes, and these codes are used for reporting purposes and for emerging technology. And we talked a little bit last week about emerging technology. So, for example, you know, there's new technology that is being developed all the time for surgical procedures and so on and so forth. And in order for that procedure to enter into a procedure to be billed, it has to be assigned a CPT code. But it's not going to be assigned a Category 1 CPT code at the beginning. At first, it will be assigned a Category 3 code, which is a temporary code, while this procedure is being vetted, so to speak, by the FDA, by the American Medical Association and the American Medical Boards. And then once the recommendation is made to the AMA by all of these governing bodies to go ahead and issue a Category 1 code, that's when that happens. And that's when it enters into the top 6 of the categories of the Category 1 codes. And the 6 sections of Category 1 codes are evaluation and management services, which are represented by codes 99201 through 99499. And you'll notice that all 6 sections of these codes are all numeric codes. There's no alpha, prefix, or suffix on any of these codes. And this is how you're going to identify a Category 1 CPT code. If all you're seeing is 5 numbers, then you know that it's Category 1 CPT code. And they're in numeric sequence, with the exception of the evaluation and management services, which are 99,000 codes, but they're listed at the front of the book. And the reason for that is because the evaluation and management services are the most widely used codes in medicine. All of the other codes are used more in specialty situations like surgery, urology, nephrology, etc., psychiatry, and so on and so forth. So those codes aren't going to necessarily be used by all medical disciplines, whereas the evaluation and management codes are used virtually with every healthcare practitioner that bills for routine outpatient office visits. And so we'll be talking in depth about evaluation and management services and how to choose the correct code and the correct level of code and so on and so forth. And we'll be spending some time on that tonight, and we'll be spending a lot of time on it in the last class that we do before our final exam, and that will be our CPT coding workshop. So the first section of the code book, and when I'm talking about the code book, I'm talking about the CPT. All right. Let me see if I can get my camera back up here. I don't know. Hold on. Okay. Oh, no. Anyway, hopefully you can see it. I can't see it, but I'm holding this up in front of the camera. This is the CPT. This one is the professional edition, and this represents all of the codes in the CPT code book. You see how thick it is? You can see that it is tabulated, all right, in many of the different sections, and we'll go over all of that. You can utilize the CPT Professional or the CPT Standard Edition. The Professional Edition would be better if you were going to be moving into a job as a professional coder. But if all you're going to be doing is billing out claims and you're needing to look up codes and verify codes against documents, then the Standard Edition is fine. There are just certain sections of explanation that are not in there that are helpful in the Professional Edition for professional coders who will be coding all kinds of medical services and not just a specialty. So the CPT Professional Edition is the code book that we're talking about when we're referring to these major sections. The second section of the code book is anesthesiology codes, and those are represented by 00100 through 01999 and 99100 through 99140. Surgery codes are 10021 through 69990. All of your radiology codes, your x-rays and CAT scans and MRIs are in the 70,000 series codes. Pathology and laboratory are 80,000 series codes. The medicine codes are 90281 through 99199, and these are codes like physical therapy services and chiropractic services and so on and so forth. And also 99500 through 99607. And then we have our category 2 and 3 codes. And of course, we won't really be dealing with those in this class, or really for that matter in this particular proficiency module. Just suffice to know what they are and what they represent, but we won't be doing any coding from there. There's also, at the end of the coding book, there are appendixes that give additional information on modifiers, which we'll be talking about tonight, summaries of added, deleted, and revised codes, and different examples of how to code from operative notes and so on and so forth. And so this might help you if you're struggling with extracting codes from an op note or a SOAP note. You may want to look at some of those examples and see how the rationales work. They'll give you the rationales, and so it'll help it to make more sense for you. Now, at the very end of the book is the index, and this is the alphabetical index. The index is, again, in alphabetical order, and it is classified by procedures, anatomic sites, conditions, synonyms, eponyms, and abbreviations. And it's all lumped together, so it's not going to be an index of procedures and an index of anatomic sites and an index of conditions. They're all together in one index. If you were in the webinar last week, which was the first half of this class, where we talked about the ICD-10 codes, you'll remember that the index for the ICD-10 book is at the front of the book, and in the CPT code book, the index is in the back of the book. And so, if you're a coder, one thing that you definitely want to have is you want to have a set of bookmarks, because what you're going to do is if you're looking up a code based on some keywords or based on information that the doctor or healthcare provider is giving you in the op note, you're going to want to look in the index, look for that procedure, and then earmark it, and then go to the actual code to see if that code matches the procedure in the op note. We'll be doing plenty of these today, and of course many, many more of these in 2 weeks when we do the CPT coding workshop. Okay, so to locate a code, basically, it's very, very similar to the ICD-10. You're going to check the op note or the doctor's SOAP note for the procedure that was performed. You're going to check for the organ that was involved in the procedure. And if neither is listed, then you'll try the condition or the keyword for the source document. And I'll kind of explain that to you as we're actually looking at source documents. Now, what do I mean by a source document? If you were in class last week, the source document is the doctor's note or the healthcare practitioner's note. And every code that is ever billed out to an insurance company must have a note that could accompany that service. Now, when you're billing out claims to insurance companies, you're not sending the notes, okay? Just the same way if you're doing your taxes and you're listing a certain tax deduction, you're not sending the receipts when you send your taxes in. You're only going to send the receipt if the IRS audits you and wants to verify that that deduction was actually a valid deduction. And so the source document or the doctor's note is the doctor or the healthcare practitioner's way to validate the services that are being billed out to the insurance company. So one of the rules of thumb is that nothing should ever be billed out unless there's a doctor's note that describes that service in detail and the reason for the service, which is the diagnosis. In CPT, you're going to find standalone codes, and then you're going to find what are called parent codes or indented codes. Some are made up of two parts. And so I'm going to show you an example of this here in just a second, from the capital letter to the semicolon, or from the semicolon to the end. And so let's go ahead. I'm just going to open up my book. I will tell you where to go. Let's look at, okay, let's go to page 448 of your code book. And if you have, this would be if you have the 2017 CPT Professional by the AMA. If you don't, I want you to look up code 75561, and it's in radiology. Remember, the 70,000 series codes are in radiology. And so I'm going to give you an example of how you're going to find parent and indented codes. This is going to be important because when you're locating a code, it's going to be a completely separate code if you add information to it, okay? And so is everybody at the 75561? You can come off mute.
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so you'll notice that the code description is cardiac magnetic resonance imaging for morphology and function without contrast materials, followed by contrast materials and further sequences, semicolon. Okay, so if the op note basically gives that information, then it's going to be code 75561. But then you'll see the next code, 75563, there's an indentation, and all it says is with stress imaging. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, it's the description of 75561 plus stress imaging. And so reading the op note is going to be extremely important, because if you miss even a few words, you may assign the wrong code, okay? And so what you're saying, 75563, is actually saying, even though all it says in the book is with stress imaging, it's actually telling you that this was cardiac MRI for morphology and function without contrast materials, followed by contrast materials and further sequences with stress imaging. Okay? And so you need to be sure when we're looking up these codes that you're looking at those indentations very carefully, and we're going to see a lot of these in our exercises. So if you see a code that basically has like an incomplete sentence, then you know that that's not the main code. Remember, in the ICD-10, what we talked about was the 3-digit code in ICD-10. The first 3 digits of an ICD-10 code are called the family name, okay? And then you have higher levels of specificity. Well, CPT is the same way. You'll have a main code, all right, and then you'll have indented codes that will give you a whole new CPT code, but that are giving you a higher level of specificity for that code, okay? So just be sure that you're aware of that, okay? Let's move on. Okay, so there are guidelines at the beginning of each of the 8 major sections that are unique to that particular section. So let's, for example, go to the section on anesthesia, all right? And that is going to start in the CPT Professional book on page 53. And this is before we ever get to the book. This is kind of like the table of contents. And the first thing you're going to see is anesthesia guidelines. And it has guidelines for reporting time, in other words, the time that a patient is under anesthesia, anesthesia services, supplied materials, separate or multiple procedures, special reports, anesthesia modifiers, physical status modifiers, and qualifying circumstances. And then, so that's all on page 54 and 55, okay? And then you get into the actual codes. So all the guidelines that are at the beginning of the anesthesia section apply to the whole section, all right? And so you need to make sure that if you're a coder and you end up getting a job working for an anesthesiologist, it would be important for you to know these guidelines pretty cold. All right, now, if you're coding in a hospital setting and you're coding for all different kinds of practice specialties, maybe you're coding anesthesia, surgery, you're coding for physical medicine, and so on and so forth, then obviously it's going to be harder for you to memorize, but you'll need to remember that these references are here to help you code properly. So you need to make sure that you understand that you need to read the guidelines carefully. And there are also going to be, as in ICD-10, under the subsections of the code section, there are going to be special notes and rules for coding subsections. These have to be read and followed in order to accurately code procedures correctly. All right. Let's talk a little bit about unlisted procedures. Medicine and healthcare technology do change rapidly, and codes may not always be available for new advanced procedures between the annual revision dates. And for CPT, the revisions come out every year, January 1st. If that is the case and the insurance carrier does not accept the temporary code, then for virtually every section of service in the CPT book, there are what are called unlisted procedure codes. And they usually end in the first, you'll have the first 3 digits, and then the last 2 digits will end in 99. So just like in ICD-10, a code that ends in the number 9 is an unspecified diagnosis. Codes that end in 99 in CPT are unlisted, usually unlisted procedures. Most of the time, if you bill an unlisted procedure to an insurance company, a special report or doctor's notes are going to have to accompany that claim in order for the insurance carrier to understand what the procedure actually is that you're performing. All right? Let's look at the symbols. Now, you'll see the symbols on every page of your code book, so you can open up basically to any page of the code book and look at the very bottom of the book. And this is if you have the AMA version of the code book. I believe the other versions have this as well. But across both pages, so you've got it open and you can see 2 pages. So you'll see the first one is a star, and it'll say equals telemedicine. A plus sign equals add-on code. A lightning bolt equals FDA approval pending. A hashtag says it means that it's an out of numerical sequence code. If it's a blue triangle, it'll be a revised code, a changed or altered procedure. If it's a red dot code, it's a new procedure. It means that this code is brand new to this edition of the book, okay? And then if you see green indentations between text, that means that the code contains new or revised text. And if you see a circle with a slash mark going in between the circle, that means that it's exempt from modifier 51, and I'll explain that in more detail at our CPT coding workshop. Okay, so just so you know that symbols are important. Now, one thing to note under add-on code, in your workbook, I want you to do this. Where you have the description of these symbols, that is going to be on page 38. Next to add-on code, I want you to write can never be the first code. Okay? And can never be the first code, and it can never be the only code. So an add-on code is always a second code that accompanies the main CPT code. All right? And I'll give you some examples of add-on codes here as we move through this class and in much more detail in the CPT coding workshop. All right, so to properly code with CPT, you identify the procedure, test, equipment, supply from the source document or the op note. Look for any modifying or extenuating circumstances. Then identify the main terms and subterms. You would then locate the procedure or cervix in the index by checking the procedure first. Then if you don't find it under the procedure, go to the anatomic site, the synonym, the eponym, or abbreviated entries as necessary. When you have found the procedure or service or alpha wording desired, you identify the code number and then go back to the main code section in the manual and be sure that they match. So again, you may have to earmark the index, look up, then flip back, look up the code. If it doesn't seem like the right code, you may have to go back to the index and see if there are other codes. And one of the things that you're going to notice with CPT as opposed to ICD-10 is that they give you a lot more choices. So they may give you, instead of just a code, they may give you a code range based on a procedure. And so what you're going to have to do is you would go to that range of codes, look up that procedure in that range, and then look back to that source document for additional clues that would help you determine what code in that range you should actually use. Okay? And so, and again, as we do these, this is going to make a lot more sense. If a range of codes, you read okay, I just told you that now, and that means under number 6, you see how it is in bold, never ever code directly from the index, okay? That's a great way to fail your test. Make sure that you code from the main body of the manual, because it could be a 1-digit difference and it's going to be wrong if you don't code it exactly as the op note tells you, okay? Make sure that you followed all the notes and the guidelines at the beginning of that section, okay? And if the exact code isn't what you're looking for, you may need to use a modifier. Now, all of the exercises that we're going to do right now in this next section won't need a modifier, so you're not going to need to worry about that, because I haven't even explained modifiers yet. I'll be explaining that here a little bit later in class. And if there is not a proper code, you may need to utilize an unlisted procedure code in that section, but you would only use those as a last resort. Okay? Always check and recheck that you've the proper code and you haven't transposed any digits. I am awful at that. I don't know what it is. I'm always transposing numbers, so I have to be very, very careful about that. An error in the code is going to mean a denial. It could actually mean a whole different procedure. Sometimes if you transpose numbers, you'll actually get paid, but you'll get paid like for a totally different procedure, and so you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Be sure that whatever you coded is documented in the medical record. And again, if you're going to be working as a biller, you may not always have the medical record in front of you, but it is going to be very important that you spot check your doctors or your healthcare practitioners' work to make sure that they are actually coding from the, that you're coding from a document, a valid document. Inclusion or exclusion of a code in the CPT does not guarantee reimbursement by third-party payers. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you can send in a bill for a service, okay, and it can be a valid service in CPT, but whether an insurance company actually pays for it is dependent on a lot more than just the code. It's dependent on the diagnosis that is accompanying that service code, and i.e., is that service medically necessary, and is it covered under the patient's policy? So there's a lot more to it than just submitting the code. Incorrect coding will lead to incorrect reimbursement and possible flagging for audits or for fraud and abuse, and there are heavy penalties for that. We're actually, in part of our boot camp, we're going to do a compliance class that talks about the penalties for fraudulent billing. It'll be enough to scare you, hopefully, not scare you away from doing this job, but at least enough to be sure that you are, you know, you and your healthcare practitioner are utilizing good common sense when it comes to compliance issues and billing compliance. And make sure that all the information that comes from your database is needed on the claim is entered for proper reimbursement. Okay, so with that, all of that said, I'm going to open it up for just a couple minutes to see if we have any questions. Does anybody have any questions before we start the exercises? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and start. We're going to do some of these together, and then we're going to do the same thing that we did last week. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do 10 to 15 minutes to do some of them on your own. Okay, so the first exercise is simple I and D of multiple skin abscesses. Okay, that sounds kind of gross, but first of all, I want you to know that I and D stands for incision and drainage. Okay, so everybody come off mute now. Using the guidelines that I gave you, and that let's go back up, let's see, I want to go back up to proper coding. So what are we going to do? We're going to identify the procedure first, because that's the first thing you're going to look up in the coding manual, okay? And the procedure is incision and drainage. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to go to the index in the back of your CPT book, and I want you to look up incision, the word incision. And again, like we did last week, if somebody finds it, call out the page. It may not be your page because you may not have the same edition, but okay, I'm on in the 2017 professional. It's page 906. And you'll notice that the keywords are in bold letters in blue. Okay, so they're easy to find. They're big letters. They're in blue, and so this is what we're looking at is incision and drainage. Okay, I don't know if you're seeing this or not. I'm just holding it up in front of my webcam, but we're looking for incision and drainage. Now let's go back to the actual, we found the procedure, okay, and so now we're looking for the anatomic site. So what is the anatomic site? Is skin, right? So we're going to look incision and drainage, and then you see all of the anatomic sites are in alphabetical order under that. So go down to the S's and look for skin, and there are two codes listed, 10060 and 10061. So hold your place with a bookmark or your hand in that section just in case this is not the right code and you have to go back to it. And let's go all the way back to the beginning of the book to 100. And this is under the surgical codes because incision and drainage is a surgical, even though it's not, you know, cutting into an organ, it's still a surgical procedure, okay? And so you'll see on page 71 of the CPT code book, the 2017 professional edition, you will see incision and drainage 10060 and 10061. So 10060 basically says incision and drainage of abscess, e.g. carbuncle, suppurative, blah, 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 cutaneous or subcutaneous, abscess, cyst, furuncle, or parenicea, simple or single. And then, remember how we talked about those indentations? The second code was 10061. indented, complicated, or multiple. Okay, so what does this particular op note tell us?
Multiple.
Multiple. So the code would be 10061, okay? Even though the main body was, you know, most of the description of 10060 was correct with the exception of one thing, which was simple or single, okay? And that's why it's really important to thoroughly read that note or that description of the service code or the description of the procedure so you'll know where to go, all right? And you know, it's honestly, it's not always going to be as easy as this. Sometimes, you know, it might say just IND of 5 skin abscesses, and it may give the different locations, or it may say simple IND of right forearm, left scapula, abscess in left scapula and right buttock. Well, I mean, that appears to be like different anatomical sites, but really it's just a incision and drainage of skin abscesses. Okay, and so you have to kind of think through that a little bit. Now this one was pretty easy, a simple IND of multiple skin abscesses. Okay, is everybody following me so far? Yes?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, let's look at the next one. Dilation of urethral stricture, male, initial. Okay, this is important. It's important because there's a different code for a male dilation and for a female dilation. Okay, so hint, hint on that. So what is the procedure?
Dilation.
Dilation. So we go back to the index and we look up in alphabetical order, we look up the D for dilation. Okay. So for me, I found that in 851, page 851. And then I'm going to be going down looking for the urethra now. For those of you who ever do coding for a nephrologist, the ureter, U-R-E-T-E-R, and U-R-E-T-H-R-A are different. Okay, so be sure that your doctor is giving you the right spelling. It's urethral stricture, so we look for urethra, and underneath that are a whole bunch of codes. But now we also have, this is on 852 down the first column, page 852, and you have stenosis and stricture. And under stricture, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 codes. All right? So how do we choose it? We choose it at that point by looking up each one. So, you know, one of the things that I have done for myself is I'll just take like a sheet of paper like this, and so that I don't have to keep going back, I just kind of write down those codes. So I'm going to write down under stricture, urethra stricture, 52281, 53600, 53601, 53605, 53621, 53665. Okay, so I've got 605, 620, 53620. Okay, so I've got 7 codes to look up here. So I'm going to go back now to the first code in the sequence, which is 52281. And I'm going to look that code up. So I want you to do it with me. If somebody finds it, go ahead and speak the description of the code. I found it. Okay. So listen, read what is on the screen, and then listen to what this code is. Cystourethroskopy with calibration and/or dilation of urethral stricture or stenosis, with or without metatotomy, or with or without injection procedure, or for cystography, male or female. Does that sound like it would be this code based on this op note?
No.
No. A couple of things that tell me that it is not. Number one is that it really is not a dilation. It's a cystourethroskopy, whatever, scroscopy. It's, boy, late at night. It also says male or female, and this says male. Okay, now that doesn't mean that discounts the code, but it just seems like that is a much more complicated procedure than what they're looking at right here, which is the dilation of the urethral stricture. So let's go to the next code, 53600. So 53600 is a few pages over.
346.
Yep, 346. And this one says dilation of urethral stricture by passage of sound or urethral dilator, male, initial. Now that kind of sounds like the code, doesn't it?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay, and you know, the thing is that once you find it, if you want to, you know, just to be sure, you can look up all of these other codes, but what you're going to do is you're going to pick the code that most closely describes what you're seeing in your op note. Okay, so even though the code doesn't say, or the op note doesn't say by passage of sound or urethral dilator, okay, it does say dilation of the urethral stricture, male, initial. Okay, so it has all the right words in it, and so the code is 53600. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more together, and then I'm going to have you give it a shot. Try some on your own. Barium enema with contrast for colon examination. All right, so what is the procedure?
Enema.
Enema. Okay, so let's look up enema. If somebody finds it.
862.
862. Enema. Okay. And we have contrast. So we've got 74270, 74280. So let's take a look at those. Seven 4270, okay, is radiologic examination, but wait a second, this is a barium enema, all right? But that's okay because that's what a barium enema is. It is basically an enema. They do barium and then they take an x-ray for a colon exam. So radiologic exam, colon, contrast, e.g. barium enema, with or without KUB 72470. Okay, but they gave us two codes, so let's take a look at 72480. And you'll notice that 72480 is an indented code, okay? And so it says air contrast with specific high-density barium with or without glucagon. Now, does this op note mention anything of that?
No.
No. So here's the thing. Some of you, you're going to start working for a doctor, and you're going to know that your doctor actually did that. They actually did, do air contrast, or they used a very specific high-density barium because that's the way they do it. But if that doctor's op note doesn't specify it, you can't code it. You can only code what's in the note, all right? And I'm going to sound like a broken record talking to you about that throughout all of these classes, all of these hours that we're going to be working together. You're going to hear me say, never code what's not there, okay? So all this op note says is barium, radiologic exam, contrast, e.g. barium enema with or without KUB, and that is going to be your code. So it's going to be 74270. Okay? All right, let's do the next one together because this is actually a two-coder. All right, there are two codes that are involved in this one, and I want to show you how to do that. So we have laparoscopy, surgical with placement of interstitial device. Okay, so what is the main procedure?
Laparoscopy.
Laparoscopy. Okay, so let's look it up. Now remember how we talked about in medical terminology that you have otomies, ectomies, oscopies, etc. Okay, and those are your suffixes, and they represent different types of procedures. You have to read your index carefully because you'll see that you have laparoscopies, like on page 919, you have all different kinds of laparoscopies. But then you also have on page 920 laparotomies, okay? And so you've got to make sure that you are reading your medical terminology correctly, all right? So we have laparoscopy surgical, and so I've got laparoscopy and for those of you, again, one of the things that you may need to do, like in a situation like this, is if you're not aware of bodily anatomy, okay, this doesn't really give us, it doesn't say where it is, does it? Right? Okay, and so what you need to know is what an interstitial device is to help you know where that would go. Now, what you would code would be the laparoscopy. Let me find that code real quick and see if I can give you some good guidance on this. This is where knowing your codes doesn't help because I can tell you where to go, but I can't tell you why. So I know what the code is because I've coded laparoscopies before. Here we go. Okay, so so basically a laparoscopy is generally going to be in the abdominal cavity, okay, somewhere in the abdominal cavity, and it will include a biopsy. So the code for the laparoscopy itself, if you go back to the general laparoscopy code with biopsy, would be 49321. Okay, and again, this one is one that doesn't necessarily give you the full description, okay? But because I know that with the interstitial device, it include a biopsy, that would be the code 49321. The second code would be the placement of the interstitial device, and this would be the add-on code. So if you would look at in the index interstitial, let's see if I find it there. Has anybody found it?
Why would you not use the code under laparoscopy placement interstitial radiation device?
Which code is that?
49327.
Okay. Look next to the 49327. Right next to the left of that code. Do you see a symbol?
Well, I was still in the index. Okay,
so
yes.
You see the 49327. If you see the 49327, okay, which is correct.
I see it.
Okay, it's an add-on code. It means it can't be built, it can't be coded alone. So basically what you would code in this case would be 49321 and 49327, because the 49327 gives you the placement of the interstitial device. The 49321 describes the laparoscopy. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So anytime you have a code, a 5-digit code, and this is a good one to remember, it would seem as if you would use that 49327, but you can't use it alone because it has a plus sign next to it, which means it's an add-on code. And remember what I said earlier when we were discussing the symbols, an add-on code can never be coded alone, and it can never be coded first. It always has to be coded in addition to the primary procedure, which is the laparoscopy. Okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys just a few minutes to do 5 through 10. We'll give you about 15 minutes to work on that, okay? If you don't finish it, don't worry, don't stress. Take your time, all right? Don't panic. And let's see how far you can get coding these next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, these next 5 codes, all right? So we're going to do, number 5 is the colposcopy of cervix and vagina with loop electrode biopsy of cervix. So again, let me get you started. What's the procedure? Colposcopy. Go ahead and look up the procedure, then look up the anatomical site, and sometimes you may have to look for vagina, or sometimes you may have to look up cervix, okay, or maybe it'll say both. So just be patient with it, look up the terminology, and then try to find your codes. And I'm going to be back. I'm going to go get myself, refill my water. See you in a few minutes. Okay, I stopped the recording to give everybody an opportunity to work on their exercises for about 15 minutes. And so now let's go through these next 5 questions. Who can tell me the code for this next procedure, the colposcopy of cervix and vagina with loop electrode biopsy of cervix? What did you come up with? You can call it out and don't be afraid to get it wrong.
57421.
Somebody got 574 what?
421.
57421. Okay. Did anybody get anything else?
I got 57460.
57460. Okay, so let's anybody get anything else?
57452.
57452. Isn't it interesting how we're all getting these different answers? Okay, anything else? All right, so we got the three choices. So let's look at 57421 first. Who got 57421?
Lita.
Okay, Lita. Go ahead and read from the book what what it says.
Hang on, I'm trying to get back to it. It is a colposcopy of the entire vagina with cervix, if present, with biopsy of vagina/cervix.
Okay, that's pretty good. That would seem pretty close to what we're seeing in the description of this code. Let's look at 57452.
Okay, that was mine, and I actually am looking at it, and I meant to go down and do 57460. Because it has with loop and electrode.
Biopsy of the cervix. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I looked at that and then wrote the wrong one down.
Okay. So Lita, your
I
code
see.
your code was good, but it wasn't the most specific. Okay.
Yeah. I see it now.
Yeah. So so one of the things that again you've got to do is you've got to really look into you've got to look into all of the words that are being used. Okay. And in this case, it is colposcopy of cervix and vagina, but then it is with. And anytime you see with or accompanying, it usually means there's more to it than just the simple procedure. And so in that case, did anybody get the 57460?
I did.
Okay.
Dawn.
So Dawn, how did you get to the 57460 code? What was your trail?
Well, none of the other ones, I wrote down all of the codes, and none of them included the with loop electrode biopsy. So I kept going down looking for the with. Okay.
Okay, beautiful. So, and you'll notice that, like under that code, the 57452, you have colposcopy of the cervix, including upper slash adjacent vagina. Okay, and then you have all these indentations with biopsy of cervix, with and endocervical curettage, with biopsy of cervix, with endocervical curettage. Okay, and so so that would be, whenever you see like something like with in your wording, be sure you take it a little bit further than just the basic code. All right. All right. Good job. So the code is 57460. Yep. Who got number 6? Debridement of sternum.
This is Dawn. I got 21627.
Dawn got 21627. Did anybody get anything else?
That's what I got. Me too.
Me too.
Whoop, whoop. You were right. Good job. Good job. Okay, here's the next one. Thoracentesis, needle or catheter, aspiration of pleural space with imaging guidance. Oh, remember that with, right? That with is telling us something already. So who got this code?
32555.
Okay, did anybody get anything else?
That's what I got.
That's what I got.
Good job. All right, next one, intermediate repair of cut on face. 5.6 centimeters. You think that's important?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, who got that one?
I got 12053.
Okay, did anybody get anything different?
I didn't get that one. I was having trouble with it.
I didn't either. That one threw me off.
Okay, so who got the 12053?
This is Dawn.
Okay, Dawn
Lita,
and Lita.
Lita got it.
Okay, Lita, why don't you tell me, starting from the beginning, okay, like I went to the index and this is what I looked up, this is what I found, and I want to kind of give everybody sort of the progression of how you arrived at that code.
Well, first I went with repair, and then
How
I
did
struggled
you
with,
get to repair from this wording?
well, you're looking for what is it? What is the procedure? And the procedure is repair. According, just using straight from the word. So I looked up repair, and just kind of went back and forth, and finally decided on skin.
Okay.
Because if it's a cut, it's it's skin that is cut.
Right.
I went to, eventually found face, and I honestly, I'm trying to remember exactly what each step was, but I did find intermediate repair of the face, of the skin, of the face,
Let's go.
and then went with the sizing.
Okay, awesome. So the code 12053 was correct. Let's all go there, all right, in your book. I want you to go to 12053. Remember how the very first exercise we had was a simple IND of multiple skin abscesses? And I told you then, I said, you're not always going to see the word skin. Sometimes you're going to see an anatomical site, and it's going to throw you off because you're going to be looking for the anatomy of the face, okay, but you're not going to find that. And so you have to realize that when you look at the procedure and you think about it and you critically think through that sentence, okay, it's an intermediate repair of a cut on the face. Well, what is a cut? A cut is on the skin, okay? So really the anatomy is the skin, not the face, okay? The face is the location, but that's not the anatomy. And so you go to 12053, all right, and you'll see starting on page 80 in the professional version, you see repair-simple, and you have all these codes. Then you have repair-intermediate, and this is an intermediate repair. And then you have repair-complex. And so is it going to be important for your doctor to tell you what type of a repair this is? You better believe it, because look at all of these codes that you can choose from. So if the doctor provides you with a note that says, I repaired a cut on the face of 5.6 centimeters, that's not going to be enough to code, because you've got a whole bunch of choices there. So number one is the doctor or healthcare provider needs to specify whether it's a simple, intermediate, or complex repair, okay? And then they have to have it measured for you, okay? So, a simple note like repaired cut on face or stitch up the cut on the face, that's not going to allow you to arrive at the correct CPT code. So in this one it says intermediate, so we're looking up the intermediate repair, and we're going to look at 12053 as 5.1 centimeters to 7.5, and since this was 5.6, that would be the right code, okay?
Okay, so initially, what did we start with to look up? We
Repair.
look up repair, or
repair is the procedure, okay? So if you go to repair, and then you go to skin, I think, right?
okay, because this one threw me off.
Okay, Lisa, I also found it by going to wound
Okay.
and face.
Repair. Let's do repair first because that one is the more obvious, right? We've got a lot of repairs, pages and pages of them. We have to get to skin. Skin. And then we have wound, all right? And then we have complex, intermediate, and simple. So if you go to repair, then you go to skin because remember, it's a cut on the face, but if it's a cut, it references the skin. And then it is an intermediate. So the intermediate is showing 12031 through 12057. So you have a lot of choices there. So you go to the 12031 and you realize that these are giving you dimensions now, okay? And so that 12031 is repair intermediate wounds of scalp, axilla, trunk, and or extremities, so that's not correct. So then you have to go to the next code that is not indented, repair intermediate wounds of neck, hands, feet, or external genitalia, that's 12041, or 12051, repair intermediate wounds of face, ears, eyelids, nose, lips, and or mucous membranes. Aha, we found it. Okay, so now we know it's that, but now what we have to do is measure it. And so it gives you the measure 12052, 053, 054, and the correct one is 053 because the measurement is 5.6 centimeters.
Right.
Okay, very good. All right, let's look at number 9. Did anybody get that one?
62000.
All right, someone said 62000. Did we get a different one? Nope. Okay. 62000 is it. Did anybody have a problem with it, or if you may not have gotten to it, but okay, number 10. This is a two-parter, okay? Anytime you see 2 lines, you've got 2 procedures, okay? So you have administration of flu vaccine, inactivated, subunit, adjuvanted for intramuscular use into muscle, 18-year-old. Woo. So what is the procedure? Vaccine?
Administration.
Or administration? Mm-hmm.
So it's 90460.
Okay. And then what would the second code be?
90653.
90653. Did anybody get anything different? Okay, let's look up 90460 in our book. Okay, so you have 90460, immunization administration through 18 years of age. Okay, so that's promising. Via any route of administration with counseling by physician or other qualified healthcare professional, first or only component of each vaccine or toxoid administered. Okay, that would be okay. However,
I see.
in this one, it gives you more detail, okay? Now, if the doctor had said administration of flu vaccine and it hadn't told you that it was intramuscular or into the muscle, then you could have used that code, but there is actually a more specific one, and that is 90471, which is administration includes percutaneous, intradermal, subcutaneous, or intramuscular injections into muscle, one vaccine. All right? And so in that case, and then of course the next one is the 90473, which is immunization by intranasal or oral route, one vaccine. Okay, so basically the 90460 code would work. It's kind of a catch-all, but because this code is this op note actually specifies into the muscle, you can use the more specific code. Now, why would you do that? Would you get paid for the 90460?
Yes.
Probably. You probably would, but you get paid at a higher rate for the 90471 because it's more specific. Okay? The less specific the code is, the less you're going to be reimbursed. And you can use a lesser specific code. Now, sometimes an insurance carrier will deny for a non-specific code. They'll want something more specific. But in this case, you know, you probably would get paid for the 90460, but you wouldn't get paid as much. Okay, and then why did we use the 90471 and the 90563 code? What was that all about? So let's take a look at that. (90563)
I wrote down 90653.
Yes, you did, and so did I. And again, I am very dyslexic, so 90. Honestly, I don't know how I do this job. The way I get my numbers mixed up. 90653, influenza vaccine, inactivated. Okay. Subinate, adjuvated for intramuscular use. So you'll notice that those parentheses there give you the extra code to specify that this was an influenza virus vaccine. Okay. All righty, really good, guys. All right, then the rest of them are going to be homework. So what I'll have you work on are 10 through 21 on your own. Again, if you have questions about them, you can always contact me, and I'll be happy to go through the scenarios with you and help you look up the codes and so on and so forth. I'm available. You know, you may need to schedule a time with me to do that, but I'll be available for counseling, you know, or any type of tutorials that anybody needs. So
Now, Lisa, real quick, now how do we know that this one's two codes? What's the...
Well, you see how that number 10, there's 2 lines?
Yes.
Yeah, that's how you'll know. For now,
Okay.
that's how you'll know.
But in the real world, actual coding.
Well, in the real world, what you would do is you would go to the section on vaccines and toxoids. So remember how each section and subsection has explanations and guidance on how to code. This would be where you would know if you're routinely coding vaccines that you code the administration of the vaccine and the type of vaccine. But it will also explain that at the beginning of the subsection of that chapter. So if you go to page 585, actually 584, immunization administration for vaccines / toxoids, it gives you guidance on the fact that you don't just code the the fact that you gave a vaccine, but what kind of vaccine. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to modifiers. Chapter 6. And that's, that's a really good rule of thumb is if you ever are working in the code book and you're like, why are they, you find the code, but you're thinking, why are they asking me for 2 codes? You always want to go to the base of the chapter, to the the beginning of that subchapter or the beginning of that chapter all together, and read the coding notes and the guidelines, and it will definitely help you. And when you're actually taking the test to become a certified medical coder, then that's going to be something that you're definitely going to want to be up on. Is right now we're just looking up codes based on what we see in the notes, but when you get into more advanced coding, you're going to have to know how to extract these rules out using the code book, not just for looking up the codes, but looking up the rules for how the codes are sequenced and so on and so forth. Okay, Chapter 6, modifiers. All right. Here's what a modifier is, and if you came to my career seminar, back in the beginning of May, I did just a little taste of this in the career seminar in the afternoon, and I talked about CPT codes and ICD codes and modifiers, and of course we didn't get into any billing or anything like that, or coding. But the modifiers, I call those the "and by the way" codes. All right, a modifier is a 2-digit numeric or alphanumeric character that is reported with a CPT code or a HCPC code that modifies the behavior of that code. All right, they're designed to give additional information needed to the commercial and federal payers in order to process a claim. Okay, and there are many, many different modifiers that give further explanation and further clarification to a procedure. Okay, a service or a procedure, every service and procedure, okay, that is rendered for the most part has both a professional and a technical component. The professional component is referencing the healthcare provider's expertise in performing that service. Okay, their knowledge, their schooling, and what they actually do. The technical component is the actual performing of the procedure. Okay, but sometimes a procedure is done where only a part of either only the professional or only the technical is being used, and so a modifier would be used to indicate that. So for example, this is very common in X-ray, okay, where let's say you have a patient that you suspect has a fracture in the vertebra of their back, and you're a family practice doctor, you don't have an X-ray. Okay, and so what you do is you send them to the radiology clinic for an X-ray, and then you have them bring the X-ray back and you read the X-ray and interpret it, but you don't take the X-ray. So you didn't perform the technical component of that X-ray, but you want to bill for your time in reading that X-ray, or vice versa. You're the radiology clinic and you're having a doctor ask you to just take the X-ray and send it to them without interpretation. Okay? And again, this would be very common. So in that case, both the radiology clinic and the doctor want to bill for the same X-ray. And what would happen is that bill would get split between the two entities, the radiology clinic and the doctor. The radiology clinic would put a modifier on the X-ray code of TC, that stands for technical component, and the doctor would put a modifier 26 that indicates professional component, okay? And why is it 26? And those are just numbers that you're going to learn and you're going to memorize over time. Are the modifiers, okay? Sometimes a modifier is needed when a service or a procedure was performed by more than one physician, okay? So for example, in surgery, this is very common where you have a physician that performs the actual surgical procedure, and then they have an assistant surgeon close them up. So especially if the surgeon is working on multiple sites. Let's say it's an orthopedic surgeon and the patient has multiple fractures. Well, the doctor goes in, opens the patient up, sets the fracture of the leg, and then while he moves on to the fracture of the arm, the other surgeon is sewing up the leg. So in that case, it's the same surgical procedure, but you're splitting it out between a primary surgeon and an assistant surgeon. Sometimes a service or a procedure is increased or reduced. Many procedures are coded by the amount of time spent on a procedure. Like anesthesiology, it's very common to code time, and the time is going to be specified by the code. The code will say, general anesthesia 30 minutes, and that's 1 unit of anesthesia. So if a patient is under for an hour, that's going to be 4 units of that anesthesia code. All right, but sometimes it's 2 hours and 10 minutes, so it's not exactly 30 minutes. So there's a modifier to that last unit that says this is a reduced amount of time. Okay, so the insurance company won't pay as much for that last unit of the timed code. All right, sometimes extra time is used, and there are procedures for that. Sometimes a surgery is being done and the doctor gets in there, opens the patient up. Let's say they're doing a appendectomy on the patient. They open the patient up and find that the patient has massive tumors, okay? So they discontinue the appendectomy. It really wasn't appendicitis. It was actually a massive tumor in their colon that was causing the pain. So instead of doing an appendectomy, now they're doing a different procedure. So they would code for the appendectomy with a modifier of a discontinued procedure and then code for the actual surgical procedure. Okay, so only part of a service was performed and then it was discontinued. Sometimes procedures are performed bilaterally. So like for example, a double knee replacement, that code is it's going to be coded twice for the knee replacement surgery, but you're going to have to use the modifier showing that it was a bilateral procedure. It was done on both knees, the right and the left. Maybe a service or procedure is performed more than once. So, a patient has a surgical procedure and something happens, a complication, and they have to repeat the surgery within a short period of time. Well, an insurance company doesn't want to pay for 2 surgeries within, a 2 or 3 day period, where they have to go back in and open the patient up. So they have to use a modifier indicating that this is a repeat procedure and they understand that, okay? Or any unusual events. And when you start looking at modifiers, you'll see that there are many circumstances that would that can modify a service or procedure. Sometimes modifiers are informational only, okay? Now, where can you find these modifiers? Most of them are found in the CPT codebook, in the appendix located in the back of the CPT manual, okay? This will include modifiers valid for use with CPT codes for ambulatory surgical centers and outpatient hospital departments, as well as office visits and so on. There are also different anesthesia physical status modifiers and those have to do with the level of sedation of the patient listed in the appendix. Appendix 1 of the CPT manual provides a list of generic testing code modifiers that are appended to lab codes. So laboratory has its own set of modifiers. So let's go to the index in your CPT code book, and let's take a look at our modifiers. You will find it in Appendix A, the very first appendix. It says modifiers. And so you'll see that we have a number of pages of different modifiers, okay? And that goes from 727 to 733, and all of these modifiers have explanations, okay? Here's what I'm going to tell you about modifiers. Modifiers are something that you will learn intimately based on the medical specialty that you're practicing with, okay? So for example, we have a lot of clients at Gold Star Medical that are chiropractic clients, and for a chiropractor, they bill to Medicare spinal manipulations, okay? When you go to the chiropractor and they, and they manipulate the spine to make, to give you relief from back pain or neck pain or whatever. And so if you're a Medicare patient and they do a manipulation, then the spinal manipulation code has to have a modifier on it in order for Medicare to pay it, and that modifier is AT, which stands for active treatment. Why? Because that's the Medicare rule. So I mean, if you're going to code for a chiropractor, you're going to learn that. I mean, and if you're out there billing for a chiropractor and you see a Medicare claim without a modifier on it, that's going to be an immediate red flag for you. So, again, modifiers are one of those things that, depending on if you're doing surgery coding, there are going to be a certain set of modifiers that you're going to use extensively. If you're doing anesthesiology coding, another set of modifiers. So again, don't panic when you look at all these modifiers and think, oh, I've got to remember them all. Remember that your coding, the coding part of your test is going to be open book, so you'll be able to look up these modifiers and find them, okay? So just know that the modifiers are here, and we're going to, the addition of a modifier to a CPT or a HCPC code doesn't guarantee reimbursements. And by the way, just so we go back a little ways, remember that the HCPC code is different than the CPT code. The CPT code represents procedures and services. HCPC codes generally represent supplies, okay, and it's a completely different code book. All right, but that doesn't guarantee reimbursement just using a modifier. A special report may be necessary, or if it's an unusual service, even with a modifier, the insurance carrier still might request additional information, okay? If you need to do a special report, there is a section in the CPT manual called the special report section, and it gives you guidance on how to do how to do special reports. The entire list of modifiers is in CPT, okay, but not all modifiers apply to all codes. I mean, there are certain modifiers that you would never use on a certain CPT code, so there are limitations in how you use and report modifiers, okay. For example, the modifier 57, decision for surgery, can only be appended to an appropriate evaluation and management code and certain ophthalmological services codes found in the medicine chapter of CPT. How do we know that? The instruction is going to be on the main code itself that to use modifier 57. Remember how in the exercise, Sherry, you said it said to use modifier 51 on colposcopy, and that threw you off? You're going to have instructions like that on when it would be applicable to use a certain modifier. Okay, some modifiers are informational only. Okay, so for example, let's look at modifier 24, unrelated evaluation and management service by the same physician or other qualified healthcare professional during a postoperative period. Okay, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that you have a patient that has a surgery, okay? And as you'll learn as we go through this, in surgery, there's something called a global fee. And the global fee basically says that you're paid for this surgery, okay? And if you're let's say you're the orthopedic surgeon, you're paid up front for this surgery, after you perform it, okay? And let's say you're paid $10,000 for this surgery, okay? There is a 90-day period in which when this physician does any type of follow-up exam or follow-up office visits, they can't charge the patient for it. It's included in the cost of the surgery, okay? And that's called the global fee. But maybe the patient has to go now to their family practice doctor because they have a cold. And so that family practice doctor needs to know that that patient has had a recent, that's one of the reasons why they will ask you, have you had any recent surgeries? Yes. How long ago? 60 days. Well, now, if you're a coder, you know that if that patient is within 60 days of a surgery, they're in the what they call in the global, and we have to put that modifier on our code to let the insurance company know that we're not part of that. We're not part of that global surgery code. This is completely unrelated to the surgery. So that modifier lets the insurance company know that so that that family practice doctor can get paid. Does everybody understand that? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. These don't affect reimbursement, but can determine whether the service, in other words, it won't change the price, but it can determine whether the service is reimbursed or denied, And it's funny because, we've done billing for family practice doctors where they'll call me up and they'll be like, we're just billing routine office visits on this patient and we keep getting denied. Why? And I'll always ask them, is there anything in the history that would suggest that the patient may have had a recent surgery? They're like, oh yeah, okay. So then they rebill it with the 24 modifier and then they get paid. Other modifiers such as 22 for an unusual procedural service or 52 for reduced service, we talked about that, like if the time is reduced, will usually equate to an increase or a decrease in reimbursement, okay? So these are just a few of the descriptors of the modifier. And you'll notice that a modifier will say -22, -23. What that means is that as a coder, the modifier always goes on the end of the CPT code. All right, so you'll have a 99212-25, okay? So increased procedural service, and it gives you a description of it, and so if that service meets the criteria of this modifier, then you can use it. So this one says, when the work required to provide a service is substantially greater than typically required. It may be identified by adding modifier 22 to the usual procedure code. Documentation must support the substantial additional work and the reason for the additional work. Okay, increased intensity, time, technical difficulty of the procedure, the severity of the patient's condition, and the physical and mental effort required. So, this can happen very often in surgery where you go in thinking you're doing a routine surgery and all of a sudden you get in there and it's like, oh my gosh, this is really bad. We have a lot more to do with this patient. The damage is a lot worse or whatever. So you got yourself an approval to do this surgical procedure, but now it's going to be much more. And so you're going to add the -22 to that procedure to indicate to the insurance company that you did a lot more work on this. There was increased severity, but you'll have to document that in the notes. The doctor would have to do that. Unusual anesthesia. Occasionally a procedure which requires either no anesthesia or local anesthesia because of unusual circumstances must be done under general anesthesia. Okay, when when would something like that happen? That might be where you have a patient who is just in extreme pain or extremely anxious, and you are not going to be able to perform your surgical procedure under a local or under twilight sleep. You've got to put that patient out. And so that would be, but normally this procedure only calls for mild sedation. So then you would put in the unusual anesthesia code and have to document in the record as to why you had to put that patient completely under general anesthesia. Okay. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You can look at these, but this one is very important. This is one of the most common modifiers in medicine, -25, and you'll see why when we work on evaluation and management codes, which are the office visits. This code is a significant, separately identifiable evaluation and management service by the same, not Sam, same physician or other qualified healthcare professional on the same day of the procedure or other service. So basically, what this is a common situation where a patient goes to their doctor, okay, they have a gash on they fell and they have a gash on their forehead, okay. The doctor is going to evaluate them, check to see if they have concussion, make sure that they haven't broken any bones. You know, they may do some neurological tests to check for, you know, disorientation or anything like that because the patient has had a fall. So they're doing an evaluation and management service. They're doing an exam on the patient, but they're also going to stitch up that cut, and that's a procedure. And so typically, if you code for the evaluation and management code and the procedure in the same visit without that 25 modifier, then the insurance company is going to do something called bundling, and they will bundle the two procedures together and only pay for one of them. All right, and I'll explain that in a lot more detail when we get into the E&M or the evaluation and management coding. All right, and so the 26 is the professional component. We talked about that with X-ray. So, for example, if let's say you're a radiologist and all you do as a radiologist, you don't perform the X-rays, but people send X-rays to you for interpretation and a report, then you could bill for that X-ray under the professional component. Mandated services, these are services that are required. So, for example, if it is mandated by a certain governmental agency that a person be tested for a certain disease, then that would be considered a mandated service. Preventative services are 33. 47 is anesthesia by surgeon. That would be if the anesthesia was not performed by or done by an anesthesiologist, but the actual surgeon administered the anesthesia. Bilateral procedure, again, it says unless otherwise identified, bilateral procedures that are performed at the same operative session should be identified by adding modifier 50 to the appropriate 5-digit code. Double knee replacement, okay, double mastectomy, bilateral procedure. Multiple procedures are performed in the same session by the same individual. The primary procedure can be reported as listed, and then additional procedures can be identified by appending modifier 51 to the additional procedure. Okay, what does that mean? it could be like, for example, if you have a patient with multiple contusions and you're going to stitch up a contusion on their forearm, and then you're going to stitch up a contusion in their left shoulder, and then you're going to stitch up a contusion on their face, that procedure of the stitching up, all right, or the whatever, I can't think of it, it's too late in the day to think of the name of the procedure, but stitching up that patient, if it's done on 5 different sites, you can report it 5 different times, but it's a multiple procedure. Unless the procedure itself has that circle with the slash through it saying that it's 51 modifier exempt, meaning that you cannot, you can only report that procedure once. Okay. So anyway. And it should never be appended to an add-on code. These are the reduced services. Again, a discontinued procedure is what I was talking about. So, for example, under certain circumstances, a physician may elect to terminate a surgical or diagnostic procedure. The modifier is not used to report elective cancellation of a procedure prior to the patient's anesthesia. So, if the patient says, they're getting ready to roll the patient into surgery, and they're like, oh, wait a second, I'm changing my mind, I don't want to do it. That's not a discontinued procedure. A discontinued procedure is you're in the middle of it, and now you have to stop it for whatever reason. Okay? And so these are just, again, some other modifiers. You can see that there are a number of different modifiers to explain specific situations as it relates to procedures. Okay, decision for surgery. This would be an evaluation and management services that resulted in the initial decision to perform the surgery. Okay. Distinct procedural services. Sometimes there are services that are done that are very closely related, and we'll talk about that in our CPT coding workshop. We'll talk about how there are edits to CPT codes that if you report 2 codes together, one code will get kicked out because they're too similar, okay? But even though certain codes may have similar components of it, they could be very distinctively different services. We see this a lot in chiropractic. You see it a lot in physical therapy. And so basically, modifier 59 is used to identify, this would be like the 25 modifier, except it's not E&M services. It's 2 different procedures, okay? This does not apply to office visits or exams or the E&M services, okay? And it says here, modifier 59 should not, at the bottom of the page here, it says should not be appended to an E&M service to report a separate and distinct E&M service with a non-E&M service performed on the same date. See modifier 25. In that case, you would use 25. Any questions on this? Again, this would be if 2 surgeons are working together as primary surgeons performing distinctive parts. You see this. Let me go back up to this, because this, if you do cardiology, you're going to see this where you have one surgeon doing the skin graft, doing the graft out of the leg for the artery, the arterial graft, and the other one opening up the patient for the bypass. And so you'll have 2 surgeons performing 2 surgeries simultaneously on the patient. They're primary surgeons. It's not an assistant surgeon like we had in the other scenario that I talked about, where you have the surgeon that performs the actual surgery, and then the assistant surgeon closes them up. Okay, this is 2 primary surgeons. Okay, there is actually procedures for performed on infants less than 4 kilograms. Surgical team, highly complex procedures requiring the concomitant services of several physicians. So, I mean, and this is usually with transplants. You're going to have a surgical team that is going to work in coordination with transplants of the different components of the surgery. okay? And this would be applicable if there are 3 or more surgeons. If it's fewer than 3 surgeons, then it would be the 62 modifier. If it's 3 or more, it's considered a surgical team, and then it would be 66, okay? Unplanned return to the operating procedure room by the same physician during the postoperative period, which is that 90-day period. So it would be an unplanned return that another procedure was performed during that post-op period, or what they call the global. All right. These are just different. So you have the assistant surgeon, minimum assistant surgeon. So these basically refer to surgery codes. Right now in Gold Star Medical, we don't have any surgery centers that we do billing for, but we certainly could. And in that case, then these modifiers would be mandatory for the biller to know how to use in the appropriate context. Okay, these have to do with clinical diagnostic lab tests. All right, and increased procedural services and so on and so forth. Okay, so basically you have tips also on how to use the modifiers in your book. This is a very, very helpful section of the book that gives you, all of the different scenarios under which you might use these modifiers, okay? In addition to the CPT modifiers, there are also HCPCS Level 2 modifiers that are used with Medicare, all right? And typically these modifiers are going to be different than the Level 1 modifiers in that they're going to have letters in them. And these are going to be letters like GA. This means that there's a waiver of liability on file for Medicare. If you've ever had a parent or a grandparent who's Medicare age have a surgery, they have the patient sign a waiver of liability saying Medicare might not pay for this or might not pay for a certain component of this, and if that's the case, then it's your responsibility. And so the waiver of that modifier tells Medicare that the patient has a waiver of liability on file. LT, RT represent the different sides of the body. So for example, if you're coding for braces, you're an orthopedic surgeon and now you are going to have the patient put the patient in a knee brace on their right knee. You're going to code for the knee brace, but you're also going to use the RT modifier to indicate that it was the right knee, so that if in 2 months you want to give the patient a brace on the left knee, it'll get paid for because you can use the modifier then for the LT, the left side. So these are also certain modifiers, XE, XP, XS, and XU. These are Medicare surgical modifiers that, again, are used only in Medicare, okay? And these modifiers replace for Medicare the 59 modifier for all other commercial carriers. And again, I'm not expecting you to remember all of this. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you right now, but the bottom line is that your modifiers are going to assist you in getting your doctor the maximum reimbursement they can by using the modifiers correctly. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break. We're going to break it is 8:04. Wow, we went really long. So let's go ahead and break till 8:15. Go ahead and give yourself a chance to get up, stretch your legs, clear your mind a little bit, and then I'm going to get into some evaluation and management concepts, and then that ought to probably take us to the end of our class today. So I'll go ahead and stop recording and go ahead and take your break, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. It's like 8:13, so I think we're good to go. Is everybody back? If you're not, obviously you're not going to say yes, so that was kind of dumb, but Belinda?
I'm here.
Dawn?
Just got back.
Christina? Lita and Sherry.
Here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, they're not going to miss very much. So let's talk about medical evaluation and management. Like I said, the medical evaluation and management codes you will find in the front of your code book. And the reason why you find them in the front of your code book is because they are the most widely used codes in medicine. Evaluation and management is just that. Remember that evaluation means we are going to evaluate a patient for a condition, and then we're going to manage that condition. And this is why when you look at modifiers like the modifier 25, which is a distinct procedural service performed the same day as a procedure. So the patient has stitches, but they also have an evaluation. Well, under medical evaluation and management, technically the stitches are part of the management portion of that code. All right, medical evaluation and management of the patient condition, okay? And so what happens is that under medical evaluation and management, a patient comes in, they're evaluated for a condition, and it is determined that this patient needs stitches and that they're going to be recommending stitches, that the patient have stitches. Well, the doctor, instead of sending the patient somewhere else to have the stitches on another day, is going to perform that service on the same day. And that's going to be the management portion. And so that's why in that case, the 25 modifier would have to be used in order to separate out, showing that that is a very distinct service from the E&M code. Evaluation and management stands for E&M, or E/M. That's how I'm going to refer to it from now on. I'm not going to say the long words evaluation and management. I'm going to refer to them as E&M codes. So the anatomy of an E&M code basically is going to, now this is a code, 99201 is an E&M code. It is a low-level new patient evaluation or new patient office visit. And the codes are numbered in sequence for outpatient office visits for new patients. The codes are going to be 99201 through 99205. And for established patients, outpatient evaluate E&M codes, those are going to be 99211 through 99215. And the difference is going to be in that fourth digit. The 0 is the indicator that you're dealing with a new patient, and the 1 is indicative of an established patient. So you have the 99201, and what I want you to do is go to your code book, all right, the very front of your code book, and look at 99201. Let's look at that code together. And it gives you a description, very detailed description of what this code encompasses. It says 99201, all right, office or other outpatient visit for the evaluation and management of a new patient, which requires these 3 key components, all right, a problem-focused history, a problem-focused examination, and straightforward medical decision-making. Okay, so well, what does that really mean? That means that a patient comes in and they have a cough, all right? The doctor is going to evaluate that problem. That is a problem-focused history. In other words, they're going to ask on the history of it is, well, how long have you had this cough? Has the cough, gotten worse, or has it gotten better, et cetera, et cetera? And then, have you had a history of, do you get these coughs very often? Okay, but they're dealing specifically with that cough. It's problem focused, okay? Then the next thing is going to be a problem-focused examination. So basically, they're going to be examining the patient's throat, their nose, maybe their ears, okay? So it's just going to be based on, the exam is going to be based on evaluating where the origin of that cough could be coming from. Maybe it's a postnasal drip, maybe it's strep throat, you know, and so they're going to check the areas of the body that pertain only to that cough. It's a problem-focused examination, okay? And it's going to be very straightforward medical decision making. Yep, your throat is red. We're going to do a rapid strep test and you know, make sure you don't have strep, but we think that it is based on the postnasal drip and the color of the mucus. This is what you have, right? So problem focused, very, very straightforward. The patient had never been seen in the office before, so the code would be a 99201, okay? There is also counseling and coordination of care with other providers or agency. That's not considered a key component, but could be included in in this code. Now, what would that entail in the scenario of a patient with a cough? Well, if the patient had it as a recurring cough, maybe the cough is due to allergies. So now the doctor is going to contact, maybe send the patient a referral to the allergist for allergy shots or something like that. That would be the counseling and coordination of care component of the evaluation and management code. So this is how an E&M code is broken down, or what we call the anatomy of the code. You have the key components, and then you have what's called the contributing factors, which is the counseling and coordination of care. In a new patient exam, all three key components have to be met in order to code a new patient exam. This is really important, okay? In an established patient evaluation and management code, or an E&M code, only two of the three key components need to be met. So, for example, let's say the patient comes in with the same scenario, a cough. And they come in as a new patient. The doctor evaluates them, does, you know, a very straightforward history, of problem-focused history, problem-focused exam, and very straightforward medical decision making, okay? And then says to the patient, okay, if the cough isn't better in 2 weeks, come back. And now the patient calls up and says, the doc told me if the cough isn't better to come back, so I'm coming back. And now the patient comes back for a second visit a week or two later. The doctor doesn't have to do a brand new history unless they suspect that the cough may be due to something else, okay? But really, if they're just reassessing the same problem, then the history doesn't need to be done again. That was taken at the beginning. They may review a few things about the history, but really and truly the patient doesn't have to redo their history 2 weeks later, okay? So in the case of an established patient, only two of the three key components need to be met in order to properly code an E&M service, okay?
Lisa, did you mute yourself?
Can't hear you. I guess she can't hear us either.
I guess not. I sent her a message. I'm trying. I think I may be making her laugh. She's not looking at me anymore. It's I can't hear.
I think she might be working on it.
I messaged Rick. He went and told her.
All right, so we're back talking about categories and subcategories of E&M codes. So as you'll see, you know, evaluation and management services can be performed in any setting. They can be performed in a doctor's office, which are the office or other outpatient services. They can be performed under hospital observation services, hospital inpatient services. They can be simply consultations, emergency department services, critical care services. Let me get back on my slide. Nursing facility services, domiciliary rest home. So depending on where the services are performed and what kind of service it is, you will find that your code may change. It's always going to start with a 99. They're all 99,000 series codes. But the E&M codes for office visits are 992 codes. And then other services are 99, hospital observation are going to be 992, going to go past the 99215 and continue on through 99299. Then 993 codes, and so on and so forth, okay? Finally, with 994, you have newborn care services, you have special E&M services for life and disability evaluation. So there's all kinds of E&M codes out there, but the bottom line is the structure of all the services and what code to choose is largely based on the anatomy of the code and how, whether certain components of the code are used. As I said earlier, if you didn't hear me, when you look at the 99201 versus, let's say, the 99211 code, the difference is going to be in the number of components. So in a new patient, all three of the key components have to be met in order to code for a new patient exam. In other words, in your documentation, you have to show a history, an exam, and medical decision making. In an established patient, you only need two of the three. So you may not take a history every single time, you know, because you may have a patient just coming in for a follow-up visit, but you'll certainly do an exam and have medical decision making. So usually of the key components that are missing, it's going to be the history that's missing. Not always, but most of the time that's the way it's going to be. So E&M services can be conducted anywhere, you know, whether it be in the office or in a hospital setting or in a nursing home. There are E&M services for all different types of medical care scenarios, okay? The following codes are used to report evaluation and management services provided in the physician's office or in an outpatient or other ambulatory facility. A patient is considered an outpatient until inpatient admission to a healthcare facility occurs. To report services provided to a patient who is admitted to the hospital or nursing facility in the course of an encounter in the office or other facility, then you would see the notes for the initial hospital inpatient care or initial nursing facility care. So for example, going back to these services, you have the initial nursing facility care. So when the patient first comes in, let's say they're transferred from outpatient and then they go straight in an ambulance to the nursing home. Well, then you're going to report the nursing facility care services. Okay, so here's the correct level of an E&M service code is chosen based on the following. The three key components, which are history, examination, and medical decision making. And then the contributory factors, which is the amount of counseling needed for the patient, the coordination of care, and the nature of the presenting problem or the complications that are possible based on the patient's condition. Okay, and then there is time. Now, time can be considered a key component, but only when the counseling and coordination of care dominates more than 50% of the face-to-face physician or patient encounter. Can somebody think of a medical profession where a doctor spends more time talking to the patient than examining the patient?
Psych services.
Psych services, absolutely. Psychiatry. So if it's an MD psychiatrist, okay, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be discussing the patient's condition with them in the beginning, maybe talking to them about their medications and doing some medication management, upping their prescription, changing them to a new prescription and that type of thing, okay? But the rest of the time is going to be spent talking to the patient about their condition, how they feel, what are they doing in their lifestyle to make them feel better, what are some of their triggers, what are some of their problems, and give a patient a time to talk and do counseling with them. And so in psychiatry, time would be the overriding factor in almost every E&M service, because they're going to bill for they'll actually bill two codes. They'll bill the E&M code and they'll bill for a counseling code as well. And so in that case, psych would be, you'd be correct in that. We did billing for, I think I mentioned this in another class or another scenario where for a while we did billing for some pediatric behavioral specialists. And so these are pediatricians that deal only with patients, children who have ADD, ADHD, and autism. That's what they specialize in. They don't treat, run-of-the-mill colds and sniffles and things like that. They're dealing with patients with these types of behavioral issues. And so all of their day is spent evaluating these kids, doing diagnostic testing on the kids, doing assessments with the parents, doing play therapy, art therapy. Almost all of it is counseling and coordination of care, okay? Coordinating with the schools on, placing the kids into special needs programs and so on and so forth. So in that case, almost every one of their visits, time becomes the overriding factor because it most certainly represents more than 50% of the face-to-face encounter. So under the key component, you have, remember, three key components, which are history, exam, and medical decision making. And I'm going to quiz you on this, so remember that. The three key components are history, exam, and medical decision making. Now, under the history, you can have different levels of history. You can have a problem-focused history that basically deals with the chief complaint and a brief history of the present illness or the problem. An expanded problem-focused history, which is the chief complaint, a brief history of the present illness, and then a problem pertinent system review, and a system means the body system, okay? Detailed would be a chief complaint, an extended history of the present illness. History of present illness is also known as HPI. All right, write that down because I'll refer to HPI, history of present illness. Extended system review, which is an ROS, review of systems. Pertinent past, family, and or social history. So the minute you get into reviewing the patient's pertinent past, family, and or social history, you're getting into a detailed history, okay? And then a comprehensive would be the chief complaint, an extended history of extended HPI, complete system review from top to bottom, and a complete past, family, and social history. So depending on the type of medical specialty you are, you may very well perform comprehensive histories. So for example, if you're internal medicine and you have a patient with multiple chronic conditions that you're going to be evaluating and managing, then you're probably going to perform an initial E&M service of a comprehensive nature to go over all their different problems, to do a complete top to bottom examination, to review their past family history, their own social history and contributing factors, maybe they're tobacco users or whatever. So that all is encompassed in what we know of as the history. And the history contains the HPI, history of present illness, the ROS, review of systems, and the PFSH, which is the past family and or social history. Okay, so that would be your history. HPI, history of present illness, ROS, review of systems, and the past family and social history, and the chief complaint. And notice that the chief complaint is always in every part of the component of a history. You must always have the chief complaint, meaning what's wrong with you today. Okay. Then you have the second of the key components, which is the examination, and the examination can be a problem-focused exam, an expanded problem-focused exam, which includes the affected body areas and other symptomatic or related organ systems. So, for example, the patient comes in with a cough, all right? In an expanded problem-focused exam, a doctor would evaluate the patient's throat and maybe their sinuses, which would be the problem-focused portion, but may expand it to the lungs to see if maybe there's some pneumonia going on, okay, or if they have asthma, possibly. Instead, maybe the cough is not related to a cold, but maybe it's related to asthma. So then they're going to take that exam and they're going to expand it to include other systems in the body that might contribute to that patient's cough. Okay, so that would be considered an expanded problem-focused exam. A detailed exam is going to be an extended exam of the affected body areas and other symptomatic or related organ systems. And then a comprehensive is going to be a complete single system specialty exam. Okay, and there's two types, or a complete multi-system exam top to bottom. So for example, if you're a cardiologist, okay, you can do a comprehensive exam even though you're dealing mainly with the heart and the lungs. It's just that the exam is going to be much more detailed. It may encompass different types of tests and different types of evaluations of that patient's condition that would contribute to it being a single system specialty exam like heart and lungs that a cardiologist might do, or a complete multi-system exam that an internal medicine doctor might do, where they're just checking everything from top to bottom. Okay, so that's the second key component. You have history exam, and then what's known of as MDM, which is medical decision making. And the MDM can be straightforward, low complexity medical decision making, moderate or high complexity, based on the number of diagnoses or management options, the amount or complexity of the data to be reviewed. So if the patient comes to you with, or comes to the doctor with a chart, a medical chart that is 5 inches thick, you know, because they've been to so many different doctors, and the doctor has to now sift through all of that that data and arrive at a diagnosis based on information from other medical professionals and other tests. That would increase the complexity of the medical decision making, and then the risk of complications and or morbidity and mortality. So in other words, you know, how high of a risk is the patient to die from this particular disease or have long-term complications from this disease that you know, we're suspecting that they have. So that's the MDM, the medical decision making. Okay, and when we do our coding workshop, we're actually going to have forms that I'm going to supply everybody that will allow you to read an op note and then use a checkoff system with the form to help you determine what level of CPT code, E&M code, you would choose for that particular service based on the op note. Now, of course, we're not going to do that today. So let's just spend a little bit of time before we finish up today on the importance of documentation. Why is it important? The medical record is required to record pertinent facts, findings, and observations about an individual's health history, including past and present illnesses, exams, tests, treatments, and outcomes. The medical record chronologically documents the care of the patient and is a very important element in contributing to high-quality care, and it gives the physician and other healthcare professionals the ability to evaluate and plan the patient's immediate treatment and to monitor his or her health care over time. And it's important for insurance carriers to prove the codes that are being submitted for billing. Okay, so there are a number of reasons why documentation is necessary and important, but obviously the main thing is for us in billing is to make sure that the document mirrors the code so that we can safely bill a code out knowing that there is documentation to support it. Okay? Because payers have a contractual obligation to enrollees, or what we would know as the patients. They may require reasonable documentation that a service that's billed is consistent with the coverage provided. So they may request information to validate the site of the service, meaning where the service took place. Was it in a hospital? Was it in an outpatient office setting? Was it at a rest home or a nursing home? The medical necessity and appropriateness of the diagnostic and or therapeutic service provided, and that the services provided were accurately reported, meaning that they were reflected in the doctor's op note or SOAP note or source document. Okay, so general principles of medical record documentation. Number one, the medical record has to be complete and legible. Now this is going to be review for some of us because we've already talked about this a little bit in our medical terminology class. But we're going to go through it again because it is very, very important. So the medical record needs to be complete and legible. Okay, the documentation of each patient encounter should include the reason for the encounter. What is that known of? What is that known as? The reason for the encounter. What's another word for that?
Chief complaint.
Chief complaint. And the relevant history, what is that? HPI. Physical exam, that's the exam, and prior diagnostic test results, that's part of the MDM or medical decision making. Assessment, clinical impressions or diagnosis, MDM. Plan for care, MDM, medical decision making. And then the date and legible identity of the observer. For those of you who may not have taken the medical terminology module, one of the things that I talked about is that as an auditor myself, one of the things that we do at Gold Star Medical is we audit doctors' charts. And our billers are taught to audit doctors' charts. And one of the first things that I will teach you how to do as a biller is look at the medical record to see if it's even a valid record. Is there a chief complaint? Check, yes. Is there an exam? Check, yes. Does the document show that there was some medical decision making? Check, yeah. Was the document signed? No. got to throw it out. Then it's not considered a complete and valid medical record. And if you were to send a doctor's note to an insurance company that wasn't signed, they could deny the whole claim and take the money back. And if it's a $3,000 surgery, that's a lot of money for an unsigned note just because the note was not signed. So these are the little details that you have to be aware of when you're looking at medical record documentation. Now, if it's not documented, meaning that it doesn't say it in specific words, the rationale for ordering the diagnostic test should be easily inferred. So in other words, you know, it could be, you could have it somewhere in the document, you know, a suspected strep throat, okay? And then you requested a rapid strep test and you coded for that, all right? You don't have to say, we are requesting a rapid strep test for possible strep throat. It was inferred somewhere else in the document, so that's okay. It was easily inferred. Past and present diagnoses should be accessible to the treating physician or consulting physician. Appropriate health risk factors have to be identified in the document, and the patient's progress, response to, and changes in treatment, as well as revision of diagnosis, should be documented. So that means there should always be a treatment plan, and there should always be treatment goals, okay? And finally, the CPT and ICD-10 codes reported on the claim form or billing statement should be supported, actually must be supported by the documentation in the medical record. Okay, so documentation of evaluation and management services. We've already talked about this. In order to document an E&M service, you have to have these components. Now, which of them are absolutely required? Which of the three are absolutely required? Anybody guess?
History, examination, and medical decision making.
Correct. Those are called what? The key components. Remember that. It's going to be on your test. The other portions of it, counseling, coordination of care, and nature of presenting problem, are considered contributory factors. So the first three bullets are key components. The second three bullets are contributory factors, and time is also a contributory factor unless what? Time represents more than 50% of the E&M service, and then it would be considered the overriding key component, okay? So under the documentation of history, under the E&M service, these would be the components that you must have. You must have a chief complaint, HPI, review of systems, and PFSH. Now, depending on the level, you may not have all of these. So if we go back to, let's see if I can find that, okay, here's the key component of the history, okay. Notice that the pertinent past, family, under social history doesn't even apply to a problem-focused or expanded problem-focused history. It only applies when you're doing a detailed history. So let's come back to the history. Oops, here we go. So under the, you always have to have a chief complaint. You always have to have an HPI, okay? And if you look at the tables, and you're going to learn these tables and you'll have the tables. So for a problem-focused history, you would basically have 1 to 3 of these components. So you have chief complaint or one of the three, okay? Under, do you need a review of systems? No, okay? For a problem-focused history, do you need past, family, and or social history? No. Under expanded problem, it would be 1 to 3 problems, a problem-pertinent review of systems, and you do not have to have the past family social history. And so these tables will allow you, when you start looking at the doctor's notes, you'll be identifying, okay, did the doctor's note identify whether an expanded problem-focused, or I'm sorry, did the doctor's note identify that we did a PFSH, past family under social history? If that wasn't identified, then you can only code for either a problem-focused or an expanded problem-focused history. You can't code for a detailed history because that's required. One of three need to be done, either past, family, or social, or one of them. Under the complete PFSH, 2 or 3 have to be met, 2 either past, family, or social. So for comprehensive. So, and it tells you a complete PFSH is a review of 2 or all 3 history areas, 2 of 3 for established patients, 3 of 3 for new patients. Okay. The chief complaint, going back to the HPI, okay, history of present illness, do we have to have a chief complaint? Always. We always have to have a chief complaint for every level. This is a concise statement describing the symptom, problem, condition, diagnosis that the physician recommended return, or other factor that is the reason for the encounter, usually stated in the patient's words. Now, sometimes the patient says, well, what are you here for today, Mr. Patient? And the patient says, well, I'm here for a follow-up visit. Okay. The chief complaint cannot be follow-up visit. It has to be follow-up visit for chronic cough or possible asthma or whatever the case is. The chief complaint just can't be follow-up visit. So that's a mistake that's made in documentation very often that you would be looking at when you're auditing a doctor's records. Okay. Moving on very quickly, we'll discuss the history and then the other key component, and then we'll be done. The HPI is a chronological description of the development of the patient's present illness from the first sign to the present. So it would include the following elements: location, where does it hurt, or what's, where are you having the problem? Quality, okay, of the problem. Severity, how bad is the pain? How long has it been going on for? What is the timing? Does it happen mostly at day or at night? What about the context of the problem? In other words, is this a problem in context with another problem that you're having, or is this completely separate? Are there modifying factors, and are there associated signs and symptoms? And we're going to go into detail about what all of these mean when we get into our coding workshop, okay? So a brief HPI contains 1 to 3 elements of the history of present illness. An extended HPI consists of at least 4 elements, and so on and so forth. The review of systems is an inventory of body systems. So this is basically, once the patient has told you what is going on, then the review of systems is going to be a review of the patient's problems. Now, this is different than the exam. This is where you're going to look at the patient's, remember, we're still in the history, okay? So we're looking at that piece of paper that the patient gave us that is telling you that this patient has had all of these problems, yes or no. And when you review the different systems, you're going to be doing that off of what the patient is telling you. Then you're going to take that review of systems, and the doctor is going to perform an exam based on that review of systems, okay? And I'm not going to get into all of that. Then the past, because we'll do that in the coding workshop, but the past family under social history consists of a review of the past history, these 3 areas. In other words, has the patient had this illness in the past, other operations, injuries, and treatments, a review of the family history, medical events in the patient's family that could include diseases which may be hereditary or place the patient at risk, and then the social history, which is an age-appropriate review of past and current activities that could contribute to the patient's illness or problem. Okay, and a pertinent PFSH, and again, this we'll go into the differences between the pertinent and the complete and so on and so forth. Under the past history, this would be some of the things that would be discussed in the past patient history: prior major illnesses, injuries, operations, hospitalizations, current meds, allergies, are your immunizations up to date, what's your feeding or dietary status. The family history could be the health status or cause of death of parents, sibling and children, specific diseases related to problems identified in the chief complaint, or disease of family members which may be hereditary or place the patient at risk. And then the age-appropriate social history could be marital status and or living arrangements. Now, I know everybody's mind is probably shot by now, but could you think of why that would factor into a patient's condition?
Stress.
Stress, abuse, spousal abuse. So if they're coming in with broken bones, and they're saying, well, I fell, and and you're looking at their situation, you're like, I don't think so. So you take a very comprehensive social history on their marital status and what that situation is. Current employment, maybe there are environmental factors in their work that are contributing to the problem. Occupational history, use of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, their level of education. Why is that important? That's important to help you know the level of understanding a patient may have about their condition. Their sexual history, not always taken, depends on the situation. If you're OB-GYN, absolutely, because maybe you're testing for STDs. But it doesn't mean that you're going to take a history of all of these, but just the ones that are relevant to that patient's condition. Other relevant social factors as well. Okay, so the rest of this, it all goes in, and we'll be talking about all of this in detail during our CPT coding workshop. We're going to start with the E&M coding, and we're going to get into all of this. So this is going to take us into the fourth class, and in the next class we're going to skip over this part. We're going to go backwards to the ICD-10 coding that we did earlier in the webinar, in the first part of the webinar, and then this part is going to be reflected. So if you want to, you can certainly start taking a look at some of these tables and so on and so forth, and reading through it and getting a leg up on it. But honestly, the last few pages of this book are all going to be discussed in the in the 6-hour CPT coding workshop that we're doing, so it wouldn't be relevant for tonight's class. Tonight we just wanted to explain what the E&M codes are and how they behave and what the applications of the E&M codes are. So we've come to the end of our session today, and I'm sorry for the snafu of the recording earlier. I'm not sure why that happened. Everything looked good on my end, but I don't know if the computer just froze up or whatever. But anyway, I'll check the recording